Greetings, Halito, hiya, and welcome. Welcome to Calithia X channel, here to add my contribution in the process of the upliftment, the enrichment, the edification, and the healing of all Aborigine, originals, and autochthonous peoples of the Americas, at home and abroad. Currently, I feel lost at sea, drowning it seems in a sea of media propaganda and entertainment. And with that said, I'd like to take you on a journey. The news lately has just been absolutely crazy, hasn't it? We've just recovering from Christmas, I think, when people are usually feeling a little bit unhappy, usually because we're just totally broke. And the weather's just changing, and we've got entertainers acting out and all kinds of strange things. I sort of logged off from the television quite some time ago, but I couldn't help noticing two new articles that came out the other day which kind of caught my attention. And one of them was that one of the states in America wanted to have 24-hour camera surveillance in the homes of newborn babies, which I thought, that's kind of weird. And then, of course, we had YouTube talking about their algorithms not allowing the people and the sites who question the sort of narrative that we're given on a daily basis from the BBC and CNN and Sky and Fox and all the other mainstream media news outlets that we're used to. And I thought that's very strange, because when you actually look at it, we're a small number within a small number. Regardless of any statistics you might see about dissatisfaction with the mainstream news, YouTube is popular, yes, and these other social media sites are popular, yes, but at the end of the day, the people who are on those sites talking about the things that they were objecting to are very small indeed. So it made me kind of think, well, surely that would make quite interesting conversation at the coffee and water machines at the office in the morning. It's something to perhaps have a little laugh about. But clearly, no, this is almost akin to some kind of book burning. So I thought to myself, let me just see if I can just look at some of the words that social engineering was a word that kind of popped into my head. And I thought, let me just have a look and see if social engineering is exactly what I think it is. Because I think most of us think of it in terms of our security when it comes to YouTube and Twitter and all the sites that are available for us to sort of chat to each other instantly. We also think about it in terms of our internet security. So when I actually looked up social engineering, let's see, what I actually found was that there are in fact two definitions of social engineering. Not only the one that we're used to from the point of view of our actual personal security. So let's have a look at what we get when we look at Google. The first thing we get is it's the use of centralized planning in an attempt to manage social change and regulate the future developments and behavior of a society. Now, here we have in quote marks the country's unique blend of open economics, authoritarian politics and social engineering. So this is the first thing that we see. So clearly we can see here that social engineering is used as a political tool to move the country's society, the behavior, all right, and the future development as well. Now, when we look at it here in the context of what we're used to, what we see is it's the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. And again, in quote marks, we get people with an online account should watch out for phishing attacks and other forms of social engineering. So again, we see it there in terms of our personal security. But if we just zoom over here to what Wikipedia says, we get social engineering in the context of information security refers to psychological manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. So that just goes in a little bit deeper there. But here it tells us that there is a difference, because this differs from social engineering from the social sciences, which does not contain the divulging of confidential information. Alright, so now we have found out straight away that it's not just about our personal identification and the security of our information that we might have online, because most of us nowadays actually do put our lives on the computer. There's actually politics kind of involved. So this is when we start delving a little bit deeper, and we're going to start looking at etymology, and I'm going to tell you why right now I think it's important for us as autonomous Aborigine people to really understand what words mean. And before I delve down into why I like etymology, I'm just going to give you 3 really simple examples of words that have either changed their meaning, never meant anything good, or just have a sort of a bad sort of vibration to them for the sound frequency. Okay, so first of all we're going to look at nice. And when I was growing up in school, we were always taught not to use that word. Nice is not a good word. And I would like to think that me sort of telling you that this common word that we use all the time isn't a good word, and it would be enough to sort of spark your curiosity to go and have a quick look. But I know you probably won't, so I'm actually going to tell you, and I think you're going to be quite surprised if you don't know already. Well, if you come from my generation, perhaps you do remember. But nice actually means to be foolish. Yes, indeed. It even means to be stupid, and that is even I will call inanimate objects stupid, like my computer, if it doesn't work, that type of stuff. But it's not even a word I like to use in my vocabulary when it comes to people, because it's such an insult to actually call somebody or tell somebody that they're stupid. It also means that you're senseless. It means you're careless and clumsy, you're weak or you're poor, you're unaware, and you're not knowing. Okay, so here we go. This is a word that we use all the time when we see somebody or something that we like or admire. One of the first things we'll say is, "Oh, I like that. Isn't that nice?" Or "I like her, she's nice," or "he's nice." And so it's just a part of our normal everyday conversation. And then we'll move on to bad. Bad is another one. When I was growing up, bad was something bad. It was just burn you, hurt you, poison you, cut you. It was bad. Keep away from it. I'm sure we can all remember Michael Jackson, where bad became something that was so good it actually became bad. So here we see now a total inversion of a word, where the original meaning in popular culture, that language that's used every day, suddenly means something else. And then of course we have another word that I think most of us use on a regular basis and don't even think about it, and that is when we see people between the hours of dawn and midday, we will greet each other, big smile on our faces, "Good morning," without thinking twice about it. We mean it with all the best of intentions. However, we also, as English speaking people, all know that when somebody is going through a grieving process, what do we call that process? We call it mourning. And that's what I'm saying about a sort of a sound vibration. There's a very much a similarity in that word. And if you think about it, nobody in their good senses would in the early hours of the day see somebody and greet them with good grieving, with a big smile on your face. I mean, nobody does that. It doesn't really make sense. Excuse me, just going to take some water. Again, so here you can see why it's important for us to understand the meanings of words. And again, that's because although we speak English, we're taught English at school, English is not inherently our mother tongue. And even though, as you can hear with my accent, I'm clearly English, but again, I have problems in pronouncing certain words and even understanding certain words. So I do again think it's really, really important for us to just be a little bit curious sometimes and not take it for granted that the words that we use on a daily basis actually mean what we think they do. So here we are looking at etymology now. And people do criticise these online sources, but I'm sorry, not everybody has the access to the hard copies, and it's always handy, obviously, to have the hard copies, especially the older that they are, because you are actually then able to see how words morph and sort of evolve and change through time. But while we have these online resources, whilst I know, yes, they can be changed, we have them, so let's just take advantage of them. I think sometimes when we complain, when they take them away from us, then we really can't say anything at all. So here we go, and I'm not going to go through all the different ways that they spell etymology. You can see here, page has been up for a while. It's either ETHI with a GIA, or it's ETI or ETY with either a GIE or a GIA at the end. But what we can actually see, what etymology actually means, it's a noun, it's the facts and the origin and development of a word. Alright, it's the analysis of a word to find its true origin. Properly study of the true sense of a word, with logia, study of, a speaking of. See logi plus etymon, true sense, original meaning, neuter of etymos, true, real, actual, related to etios, true, which perhaps is cognate with Sanskrit satya. Alright, we won't go further into that, because as you can see, where you have etios here, all you've got to do is add the H and you've got ethos, and then you start talking about religion and everything. So let's go on down here. We've got in classical times, with reference to meanings later to histories, classical etymologists, Christian and pagan, based their explanations on allegory and guesswork, lacking historical records, as well as the scientific method to analyse them, and the discipline fell into disrepute that lasted a millennium. Flaubert, Dictionary of Received Ideas, wrote that the general view was that etymology was the easiest thing in the world, with the help of Latin and a little ingenuity. Well, of course, he could say that then, and we don't know exactly when this was dated, but clearly Latin was a language that was more commonly used. In the 21st century, we're looking at Latin as a dead language, so it helps us to understand the true meanings of the words. It helps us to sort of get a better understanding of where that word came from and what it was used for when it first came into being, and how it's changed through time. And we see that through here, where it does actually become a linguistic science. Alright, treating of the origin and evolution of words from 1640s, as account of the particular history of a word, mid-15th century. And then here we have a little quote: as practiced by Socrates in Cratylus, etymology involves a claim about the underlying semantic content of the name, what it really means or indicates, and this content is taken to have been put there by the ancient name givers. Giving an etymology is thus a matter of unwrapping or decoding a name to find the message the name givers have placed inside. So you can see why I personally like it, because we're talking about unwrapping and decoding names to find messages, alright, that have been placed inside by ancient name givers. So now that we know that, that's the reason why we use etymology. Let's delve straight down into it and start looking at centralized, because the first thing that we saw when we actually looked up social engineering was centralized planning. So what is centralized exactly? We learned that in 1795 it was to bring to a centre, to draw to a central point. In the 1800s, come to a centre, from central plus eyes, on model of French centralizer 1790, a word from the French Revolution. So okay, suddenly we have revolution. We're talking about some kind of upheaval, some kind of war, generally applied to the transferring of local administration to the central government. Okay, so we're having a move towards the centre then. So that community living, so local administration where everybody's kind of looking after everybody, that's going out the window. We're looking at the government looking after everybody now. Okay, so and here we have a quote that gives you a little bit of the motivation of government now, from Louis Antoine de Saint-Jouy, saying that government should have a central point throughout its whole periphery. The state of the monthly expenses amounted to 400 millions, but within these 7 months it is reduced to 180 millions. Such is the effect of the centralisation of government, and the more we centralise it, the more we shall find our expenses decrease. Right, so that was in the Discourses on the State of Finances in 1793. So straight away we can see here that the primary focus is to really save money and to draw everything into the centre while doing so. Alright, so let's have a quick look at plan. And obviously I'm not insulting anybody's intelligence when we look up the word plan, but I did find something quite strange which I thought was quite important and noteworthy. Alright, so here we can see that in the 1670s it was really a technical term that was about perspective drawing. 1706 as drawing, sketch or diagram of any object. Alright, and it was the notion is of drawing on a flat surface, meaning scheme of action or design is first recorded from 1706. So we can see that there's been a little bit of a change there from just drawing a sketch or any object, maybe an architect's design, a map, that type of thing. It's kind of moved slightly, but where I thought it got really interesting was again in the 1700s. We go down to 1728 when we actually we start talking about planned economy. 1930, oh sorry, that's the 1728, to make a plan. That was when we see making a plan would be similar to, say, you or I making a plan of a speech, maybe drawing out a mind map, or making a plan of what we intend to do for that day. Alright, but then we see planned economy attested from 1931 and Planned Parenthood from 1942. So we can see that the planned economy is part of this push towards the centre, and we see here Planned Parenthood in 1942, which is political correctness really, for the Birth Control Federation of America. Now we're going to see some things kind of slightly tie in slightly as we delve down more into these words. Okay, so we've come across centralized planning, so we've learned that it's about moving everything to the center and it's about making plans. So when we look up social, we want to actually now look up social engineering. What we find out, again, you kind of see this, they call it evolution, I call it a sort of a morphology of the word. Alright, and again it seems to move with the way how people groups and society is moving. If you look in the late 15th century, what we see, it's devoted, and that's the very first word, and I always think that's quite important, the first sort of words that you see as the definitions, and it says it's devoted to or in with others, from Middle French social, 14th century, and directly ties, united, living with others, of marriage, conjugal, from socius, companion, ally, probably originally follower, from pi, socul. We won't go into all of that, we'll just go on down to see how it starts to change, alright, as people groups start to change and this push towards the centre starts to become more prevalent. So we see then it's become a sense of characterised by friendly or geniality. Well, being genial is really about being polite, and that's from 1660s. Now you have meaning or liking to live with others, companionable, disposable to friendly intercourse. Friendly intercourse is conversation, and that's from 1720s. And then it goes on to meaning of or pertaining to society as a natural condition of human life. Well, we've got a new word there, so society. When we actually look up society, it kind of links in with politics and links in with social, so it's a waste of time to actually do that. But we see that it's a natural condition of human life. That's first attested in 1695 in Locke. Right, so it's the sense of pertaining to fashionable society now in 1873. So you kind of got this total move from the 15th century of being devoted to and relating to family life, living with others, of marriage, of conjugal, united companionship. It's moved now to polite conversation and fashionable society. All right. And I suppose if you're in fashionable society, you're going to want to get noticed, which of course then gives rise to what here we see is the social climate. That's from 1893. So you've got your social worker in 1890, social work rather, sorry, in 1890, social worker in 1886. So we can see here the worker was in 1886, and then it became government sanctioned in that they got a label and probably started getting paid for it. Social drinking was first attested in 1807. Social studies as an inclusive term for history, geography, economics, and it does include anthropology and everything else, because obviously they just kind of were returning from their great and wonderful voyages and disseminating all of their information, but we'll go into that further later on down. So social studies as an inclusive term for history, geography, economics, etc. is attested from 1916, and social security, a system for state support for needy citizens, is attested from 1907, and the act was passed in 1935, and we have a similar system in England, so I'm pretty sure that the dates would probably be quite similar in the UK as well. And of course we've got social butterfly from 1867, alright, and that's in a figurative reference to flitting. But let's just quickly bounce down here, because we can see obviously if you're in a situation where you need to be a social climber in order to get yourself noticed, maybe where you are you're not getting noticed, so you have to move on. So it's absolutely no difference from what we would see today in social networking. Alright, you get people who are very good at it, they build up networks of people very, very quickly, so it's no difference. Then of course we have a social contract, where then we start to look at some kind of legality in the 1763, and that's from translations of Rousseau. And then of course we have social Darwinism. Now this takes us back again to the Planned Parenthood, and when you look at social Darwinism there, we're actually looking at the origin of species and everything else. Alright, and I find that quite interesting that you see the origin of species in 1887, and then because this man here, he's come up with this theory of this survival of the fittest idea of how man came about to be on Earth, and then all of a sudden you sort of get social engineering with the 1899, alright, which is a few years later. However, we see that the social sciences started somewhat earlier, and this is one of the things I want you to kind of pay attention to, because we can see it's almost like there's some kind of forward planning that's gone on there, alright, because the social sciences, which is the study of man, is 1785, and then you get the social engineering, which is from 1899. But before that could take place, you had to have this theory come out about where man came from, in order for the type of engineering that you wanted to put into place to take hold. You had to have a theory that people were going to buy into, in other words. So of course in the late 19th century the newspapers were saying that social evil is prostitution, and then we have social justice in 1718. Now that's quite interesting, because I think here you can see that there is a push against this push towards the centre. So you're getting people who are trying to fight for social justice. Today we have a very similar thing, except they're called social justice warriors. They've just had another little bit of another word added on to their label. Sadly, as we see when we delve down into a lot of these groups, what we notice is that they a lot of times they sort of get taken over, unfortunately. basically what the social warriors, social justice warriors of today are doing is they're fighting for more progressive policies to be enacted within Congress. I suppose in America it would be Parliament, if it was the UK. But this is what happens when you sort of get this push towards the centre. By virtue of how it works, you're going to get disenfranchised people who are going to feel that they're not getting justice, and they're probably completely within their rights to feel as if they're not getting justice, because maybe their piece of the cake, their piece of the pie is extremely small. Maybe they're not getting any of it at all. But when you sort of see things like, say, with Madonna and these semi-naked women running around with sexual toys, screaming about burning down the White House. I mean, it's just totally ridiculous, really. I mean, you can't really take that seriously. So it's almost as if we're seeing a sort of a political correctness take over a lot of these movements, where they're not really going anywhere. They're almost like a sort of a placebo. And as I mentioned, you have the social network in 1971, and then you get the social network in 1984, which would be no different from the social butterfly. Alright, and then social media 2008. So we've looked at social, so let's just have a quick look at engineering. I'm going to take a drink while we're waiting for that to just wake itself up. Lovely. Now, what we have here with engineer, and again, these first words are really concerning, because the first things we see that it's a constructor of military engines. From Old French ingenieur, engineer, architect, maker of war machines, schemer, 12th century. So it looks like the French were sort of doing something slightly different, because at least you're looking at architect first before we're looking at a maker of war machines. So maybe they were actually building some infrastructure there. We'll have a look down, we'll see the English were doing something completely different, but that's another thing. Right, let's move on. From late Latin enginare, general sense of inventor, designer, is recorded from early 15th century, and in the civil sense in reference to public works is recorded from the 16th century, but not the common meaning of the word until the 19th century. But you still get this lingering distinction as a civil engineer. Now when we move down here to see it as a verb, we can see that it seems like the English had the word just after the French, because in the 13th century they have it as a verb, and in the 13th century we see they have it as a verb, but it actually means to put to torture. And Middle English again, we still see verb, engine, contrive, construct. Okay, it's contriving first. I suppose you have to contrive. It's just an unusual word. If you're going to be building something, to use the word contrive, it's almost like, well, I'm going to make it up and kind of put it together as I go along. That's what it looks like. But it also meant seduce, trick and deceive as well, which I thought was quite interesting. But again, we see this kind of morphing of the word, where we get the 1818s is to actually act as an engineer. So you're not the constructor of the military machine, of the military engine anymore, you're acting as an engineer. So this is where we kind of see the planning coming in, because you get a figurative sense of arrange, contrive, guide or manage. And manage again is another word that's worthy of looking up, but we're not going to spend all day looking up words, and that's attested from 1864. Alright. But we can see all these words here, seduce, trick, deceive, etc. Alright, so we've looked up social engineering. What we need to do is just very quickly look up some of the words that just kept on popping up as we looked up social engineering, okay, we saw politics and we saw science. So we'll have a quick look at politics here. So politics in the 1520s was the science, again, of government, from politic, modelled on Aristotle ta Politica, Affairs of State. It's actually the name of a book. But what I thought was quite interesting, it's not on this one, is it? It's because he also has this book where he calls people animals. Alright, we'll have to look that up quickly, just so that I can show you. And politics is the science of good sense applied to public affairs, and as those are forever changing, what is wisdom today would be folly and perhaps ruin tomorrow. Politics is not a science so properly as a business. Alright, so here we're seeing it. Politics is a business. It cannot have fixed principles from which a wise man would never swerve, unless the inconsistency of men's views of interest and the capriciousness, and again another noteworthy word that could be worthy of looking up, of the tempers could be fixed. Alright, now clearly what's been said here is that when you're looking at the affairs of the centre, and here we can see that it's a business. You know, the business is concerned about keeping its own self going. A business is concerned about getting as many resources as it possibly can to create the product or service, whatever it is that it has, which is going to want to sell at the top rate, but the resources that it's using in order to make that product or deliver that service, it wants to get that as cheaply as possible. Alright, I think we're all in agreement there. Let me see if I can just look this up quickly and see if I can just find that reference with regards to the political no, that's alright. Okay, let's leave that and just look up science. Alright, now here we have science, and this is another one where you see like this kind of morphology of how science changes. It's actually quite interesting. There's quite a few things that I'd like to point out when we go through science actually. One is how the word changes, although it doesn't change, it remains a noun. What you find is science itself sort of changes. What science means changes, alright? And I think that kind of goes with how science is today. It very much sort of adds up, and I'll show you why. In the mid-14th century, it was what is known. It was about knowledge of something acquired by study, information, also assurance of knowledge, certitude, certainty, from Old French science, knowledge, learning, application, corpus of human knowledge. 12th century, from Latin scientia, knowledge, a knowing, expertness, from sciens, genitive scientis, intelligent, skilled, present principle of scire, to know, probably originally to separate one thing from another. Now this is when it all starts to get a bit strange. To distinguish, another strange word, related to scindere, to cut, divide, from pi, root, ski, to cut, split. Alright, source also of Greek schism, to split, rend, cleave, Gothic skidan. Alright, we'll leave it there. Let's just deal with these couple of words here. Distinguish is a really funny word, which I've actually put up as a separate etymon search, and you'll see why. But here we have schism. Now normally we would say schism in English. I'm not sure, I'm pretty much sure American people say the same. But with schism, what you find here, it is about a split. It's about this huge split, actually. And I'm going to give you an example. There has been 1,000 years, I repeat that, 1,000 years split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. That's quite interesting there, because you've got two R's, like a Romulus and Remus thing. Well, basically, like, it really seems that's what we're looking at, two brothers arguing. But anyway, let's carry on. From the late 14th century, we can see there's this like development into book learning. So to a degree, they're still keeping some of what but it's starting to change, because as we read on, we can see that it's a particular branch of knowledge now, or of learning, also of skillfulness, cleverness and craftiness. And again, this is another word that I have problem with, craftiness, because you can be crafty in two ways. You can be crafty in that you can use your hands, you can craft something, you can make something, a tool you can make maybe, or something beautiful to look at or to wear. Then there's also craftiness of the mind, where you are you have a silver tongue or a charming tongue, and you're able to talk to people and manipulate them in ways that will get them to do what you want them to do, that will be for their betterment. So it's like a one-upmanship type thing. So again, we sort of have these words that have these double meanings, alright? And then it still goes on as experiential knowledge, also a skill, a handicraft, a trade. Now I see trade all of a sudden gets in there, alright, and it's a handicraft and a skill. It does seem to have moved from what's known, acquired by study, learned application, intelligent skill. It does seem to be sort of going down a step slightly. And then from late 14th century's collective human knowledge, especially that gained by systematic observation, experiment, and now we've got reasoning, you see. So we seem to have sort of this bit here of the scientific method changes. It just changes, because whereas before you had that repeatable that would be here, you get this reasoning, alright, which I think is quite strange, because that's how, when you're able to repeat your observation and your experiment. So you've made an observation, you decide you're going to do an experiment, you get an answer, and other people around you do the same observations, they do the same experiments, and they get the same answer. That's how you get knowledge, intelligence, skilled. What was the other one? Certitude, certainty, you see. That's where you get excellence from. So I don't know what happened, but something has definitely happened here. And then you get modern restricted sense of body of regular methodical observations or propositions concerning a particular subject, or speculation. I mean, that's even worse than reasoning. At least when you're reasoning, there's some kind of common sense there going on. But pure speculation, I mean, I could be saying I think the moon is made out of cheese, and giving you a perfectly valid argument why I think that's so, but that doesn't make it so. So, we just see this real move from what seems to be like common sense to a lot of book learning and reasoning and speculation and alright, but that's attested in 1725, and this concept commonly was called philosophy. There you go. Sense of non-art studies is attested from 1670s. Now that whole subject of non-arts, again, another subject that's worthy of looking into, because you can see these changes that happen in society, and I would say that it's a type of social engineering. But what we see here, as I say, is this move from certainty and certitude and excellent and applied knowledge to speculation and reasoning. So here, and this quote I think actually really sort of brings the point home, because here you've got Stephen Jay Gould saying science, since people must do it, is a socially embodied activity. it progresses by hunch, vision, and intuition. Much of its change through time does not record a closer approach to absolute truth, but the alteration of cultural context that influence it so strongly. Facts are not pure and unsullied bits of information. Culture also influences what we see and how we see it. Theories, moreover, are not inexorable inductions from facts. The most creative theories are often imaginative visions imposed upon facts. The source of imagination is also strongly cultural. And as I said, that's Stephen Jay Gould. I mean, there's two things he's kind of said here, and one of them is we have a saying here, which is necessity is the mother of invention. So if you need a tool or something to make a task easier, you're going to put your head together, or put your thought patterns together, and make up something that you think is going to work for you in helping to make this thing a lot easier. And clearly here, what he's saying is that the dominant culture and the imaginations and the cultural norms that this dominant culture will follow is going to be the direction in which science goes. And we see that when we saw social Darwinism, because what happens then is you end up with this theory about evolution and the origin of the species and the the survival of the fittest. Sorry, my brain just went a bit blank then. The survival of the fittest being the dominant idea and the dominant culture. So clearly then that is going to be the way in which science is pushed forward, because that whole thinking is going to bring forth certain ideas, all right, and that is going to be the sort of self-motivating factor of science. Alright, and I think we can leave that. I think the last thing here is this little bit here about blinding someone with science. I think we've all sort of seen the little skinny, half-bald-in science teacher standing in front of his desk and in front of an even huger blackboard that you even wonder how he managed to get up there to write all of those things, and all kinds of equations and madness on the board, and most of us would look at it and just absolutely have no idea what he's talking about. Now let's have a quick look at distinguish, and then we're going to sort of wind it down there and go on to a quick wrap up. Okay, what we've got here in the 1560s with distinguish, and this is the issue I have with distinguish, there's just something about it vibration wise it doesn't sound right to me. I've always not liked it, and then I decided I would look it up just to prove just to really see if I was right. And in fact the very thing that I didn't like about it is the very thing that they point out in here. So what we've got is 1560s recognises different or distinct from what is contiguous or similar, perceive, make out, and I really want my indigene relatives to listen to the words that are used here, because I think it's really important. Alright, so it's the stem of distinguere, or directly from Latin distinguere, to separate between, keep separate, mark off, distinguish, perhaps literally separate by pricking, from assimilated form of dis, apart. Alright, tinguere, to prick. Compare extinguish and Latin instinguere, to incite or impel. Alright, so straight away there's just a whole list of words there that are nothing good. I mean, even just from the point of view of dis, in the UK, every indigene original knows that a dis is a disrespect. It's something that's not really tolerated. Alright, and then Watkins says semantic transmission obscure. So clearly here that they don't even know where the word comes from. The sense might be from pricking out as the old way to make punctuation in parchment or some literal image. Pie root meaning to push, thrust. The meaning of ex and restinguere, to extinguish, and distinguere seem quite distinct, but can be understood if the root meant to press or to push, extinguere, to put a fire out, restinguere, to push back, suppress, and distinguere, to push apart. Thence distinguish, mark off. And this was all in the 1560s. Alright, so now we have a little bit more explanation. The suffix ish is due to the influence of many verbs, in which is the equivalent of Old French is, ultimately from Latin interrogative, and I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Suffix iscari is also the case in extinguish, admonish, and astonish. So we can see, but suddenly, it was always in the 1500s was to mark or note in a way to indicate difference, and that of separate from others, of mark of honour or preferment, is actually from the 1600s. Alright, so we suddenly see from the 1500s, from this marking off and knowing that it's a way to sort of separate people and to keep them separated, to put out a fire. I mean, and that's exactly what I said about it. That's exactly what I didn't like about it. It just sounded too much like extinguish, to put out a fire. If you're putting out someone's fire, you're putting them out forever, basically. That's what they're saying. So, I just didn't like that at all. So let's just wind it down now, because I've been chatting for a while, and it's really about taking a look at what we've actually seen. And as I was saying, it really is about being able to kind of write a slightly different story from the stuff that we've been constantly barraged with on the news and on the media. So when we just curiously decided to look up social engineering, what did we find? We found that there we go, back on our journey. We found that the words that we actually looked up had a slightly different meaning from what we really thought. And actually what we're going to do is kind of put the story together, and I think you might agree with me that what we're actually looking at is more what we're seeing rather than what we're being told. Alright, so when we looked up social engineering, what we found that there was just this centralized planning going on, and it was very much this push towards the center. Alright, everybody's being pushed towards this central entity which is controlling everything, and in the reference it was actually talking about the government. Alright, now what we saw when we looked up social engineering was that what we were actually seeing was that it was, in initial stages, it had very little to do with what we normally think of as in an engineer, in that they are architects and constructors. It was very much from the very beginning about torture. It was very much about war, alright, and very little about the actual construction, which is what we normally would think of. If you do a Google search, you're going to see, and go to images when it comes to engineer, you kind of see these Bob the Builder type images, really. And that's what we're led to believe, that here we have all of these buildings here and these toys, which engineers are very much a part of creating, seemingly to make our life seem a little bit easier. But as we sort of delve down more into what the words mean, what we actually find out is that it really has very little to do with what social meant in the 15th century, which was very much about congeniality, allies and friends and family. It suddenly became about becoming this kind of social butterfly and wanting to stand out from the crowd and wanting to do social networking, to be seen, basically. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a look at what central planning would have looked like, say, in the 1500s. All right, we've been calling this central entity the government, but here we can see the central entity is actually the church, and they do a sort of a blow type of mode of operation. And what I mean by that is they have their agents that they have set up, because remember, it's all about keeping this central entity going, and if it's being run like a business, then you have to constantly expand. Expansion is the key. All businesses basically think if they don't expand, they're going to die. So you have there the expansion is there, the justification for the action. All right, and these are the permissions that were sort of put out to the various agents and agencies that would have been acting on behalf of this particular agency. All right, this particular body, this particular entity. Now they are going now on a two-pronged approach, because they're going with force, and then they're also going with a doctrine, with a philosophy. But they bring the philosophy first, because ideally what you want to do is coerce as many people as you possibly can, because those people that you coerced, you then distinguish them from the others, relabel them, rename them. The ones who do not want to coerce and be a part of your jurisdiction or a part of your philosophy, you distinguish those as well. You mark them off, you give them a separate label. Alright, that makes it then possible for even the ones that you have recently coerced to be on your side, to go and fight the ones who don't want to be a part of the system. Alright, so it is this kind of blow by blow thing. So you're nice to them first, then you because obviously you don't go in guns blazing. Initially you have to send out your reconnoiter, you have to send out your spies in order to scope out the land and understand who the people are, where they are, how they behave, what their habits are. You have to find out certain weaknesses about them in order for you to be able to attack them. But in the meantime, you're coming with a new philosophy. Alright, so we've got like social engineering there 101. And initially when I looked at this picture, I was just looking at it because I thought of the symbology of it, actually. The actual map itself and the picture, because it's old. But suddenly the symbology just kind of popped out at me, because it was like, you've got the engineers there making these machines that enable them to come in from this side, come in from that side, come in from this side, and come in from that side, and directly, although these aren't all weapons of war necessarily, it's the symbology of showing you an approach, how things are done. It's done politically and it's done physically. And as I said, at some point they have to realize that the force isn't always going to work. Force will work when you're going to look at new territories, but you have to set up your institutions that are going to perpetuate your system. All right, and you do that by having studied all aspects of the man, from his physical body to the way he speaks and what goes on in his mind, every aspect of what he could possibly be thinking about, from his relationship with the earth to his relationship with his creator, where he thinks he sits in the galaxy even. Okay, you're going to set up these institutions that are going to be able to manage the data, collect the data, and then you're going to need the institutions that are going to then send that data out. And as we know, the social sciences are really the data collectors, because they cover every aspect of man, from anthropology, history, geography, sociology, and social sciences. So all aspect of man is covered. Then you move on. As I say, he has to do this because it's a way of keeping itself going. The system will keep itself going by creating the industry around it that will perpetuate it for as long as possible. But we always have to remember that it's a business. It's acting as a business, and all businesses, if you think about it, they will sit down and draw up their various plans about how they're going to move forward. You and I maybe will make 2, 5, 10-year plan for the business, but if you think about it, when you're managing large masses of people, you're possibly going to be doing 20, 30, 50, 1,000-year plans, which when you think about it doesn't kind of seem to make sense to us. But if your ultimate goal is to keep your business going for as long as possible, then you are going to be, even though you might not experience it, you're going to be making plans, you're going to be setting down ideas that future generations that are part of that system are going to be able to work on and enact. So here we have the 5 major institutions that really are about getting the information that the 7 social sciences, the data collectors, have gathered and are still gathering, because at the end of the day, you can have a politician or a private company that wants information. They can go to any one of the branches of the 7 social sciences, and if they don't have that information on hand, they can pay to get that information. They can pay to have that experiment done. Alright, and again, as I said, media are the people who really then are the ones who push that information out. If the government has found out, says, for instance, we see statistical data about populations and stuff like that, there's somebody there collecting that data. Now, obviously, you're going to have a situation, an institution rather, of education, so that you can educate people within the system, again, to keep the system going. You're going to have the religious institutions that are there to take care of mind, body and soul, because you might get those who don't want to partake in the politics. I mean, maybe you have some of these in here that want to partake in the politics, but everything is covered. All bases are covered. You've also got family covered, because of course you've got all the institutions from marriage to divorce to child services, etc. Again, everything is covered. And of course here we have, the politicians, again, run as a business, and I think America is a fair example of that, with the type of whistleblower releases that we've had of late. Okay, so as you can see, it's all very, very busy and about keeping everything going, really. It's about keeping everything going. That move into the city, that's all about politics, that move away from the land, the move away from the real social science and not the social science that they've given us. So I say it's all distraction techniques. This star doesn't look the same, and this person's character has been assassinated, and that's because really we need to look at it from the point of view of the fact that it's like whistles, guns and whistles. It's just flashes and bangs. The crazy guy behind the curtain, time to log off, really, because it just gets a little bit too much. It can get a little bit, you can be overawed by it, put it that way. So as I said, it's time for us to really go back to what social sciences was actually about. It was the social side of it was about the family, it was about companionship, it was about allies, family living, marriage, congeniality, and the science was about surety. It was about certitude. It was about knowing. There was no sort of speculation there, which is what we get a lot of times nowadays. And that's the thing of it. A lot of the stories that we're told about history are just lies. You peel back the layers of the onion, and there's really nothing there. That's why I say look up your genealogy. Just find out about who your relatives are, link back with people in your community, get back in touch with family, because they are the most important things. That's what social science is all about. Yes, I know my genealogy, I am American. Yes, I know my genealogy, I do have African in my family, that's perfectly fine. It's still something to be proud of, alright? But I just think it's time for us to really stop listening to other people telling us about who we are. People who we can see are clear, known liars. Okay? And with